Hello and welcome to this webinar presented to you by Eddy Grant, Director of Safety with Symphotech Limited and Professor of Professional Practice at the University of Cumbria, looking at the roadmap, the government's roadmap post-COVID to recover and reopen the festival and events sector. Over the winter, we presented in partnership with the Association of Festival Organisers a series of other webinars which were very operational in looking at how to develop COVID policy and event safety plans. And there's a link later on in the presentation to some resources to help you look at that if you missed those. But we've decided to make this one more widely available, generally available, to support event safety managers, festival directors, and those who own or are otherwise the trustees of organizations that are running events, primarily in assessing what the roadmap means, what the key steps are, and to inform themselves in decision making. And there is a disclaimer at the end of all of this, which sets out that context. Of course, you can approach Symphotech directly if you want to engage their professional services. But for now, this is meant to support the sector in developing thinking. And with that in mind, I shall hand over to Eddy Grant.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for taking the time out of what's quite a challenging period as we prepare to reopen to look at this. I hope it's of some value to you. The government have made it very clear that it's data, not dates. And yet that roadmap is built around dates. And we're thinking about this. So there seems to be this problem. And there's a simple reason for this. This is not going to be allowed to happen by the government again. And I would suspect that it will err on the side of caution when it comes to reopening. But in its roadmap, the Prime Minister was very clear that there will never be a COVID-free world. And he went on to say that we've got to reopen. We cannot continue with the restrictions. And his intention that will be irreversible. But then again, he would say that, wouldn't he? So what does data, not dates mean? Essentially, he has set out 4 reopening tests. He set out 4 different steps to reopening, and an element that has not been gone into in much detail in the mainstream media. There are 4 reports about reopening. So each of the 4 tests apply to each of the 4 steps. And test 1, the vaccine, it would seem from the government that this is almost the only test that they're going to lend weight to. And whilst they were delivering around 3 million vaccines a week in the middle of February, it's now dropped to around 300,000 a day, which is around 2 million a week. And this is all linked to supply. Test 2 is the data that they're missing, although indicative data. And test 2 is, does the vaccine absolutely reduce the pressure on the National Health Service? And test 3 is about infection rates, making sure as the reopening happens that there isn't a resurgence and that pressure comes back on the National Health Service to unacceptable levels. And the last, and some would say the most challenging of the tests, is that there isn't a new variant of concern. There will always be new variants, but it's whether they're of concern, and that will be around whether they affect the first 3 tests. Is the vaccine going to essentially need replacing? So alongside this, he set out 4, or if you want to be more accurate, 5 steps back to normal. The first mini step, which was today, which was schools reopened and we can exercise with 1 other person per household, indoors, outdoors. And so that's really good. The second part of step 1 happens towards the end of the month, and that will be a general relaxation just prior to Easter of meeting outside, but there's still a requirement to minimize travel. Why these steps are important to us is because seeing that those dates are met. And what the Prime Minister has set out in his steps is a 5-week period between each step, and that's so that the data can be looked at, can be analysed, and he can now announce 1 week before the unlocking step that unlocking is going to happen. So whilst they've set out these dates, it's clear on the 22nd of March that the government will be saying whether or whether not that unlocking can go down, because the government has said in its roadmap, it has promised that these are the earliest dates. They are not the guaranteed dates. Step 2 is significant, and that will see a general relaxation to what ongoing events and activities. People will emerge further from lockdown. And I think the social interaction will increase, and there's outdoor hospitality. So it's at this particular point, having got the schools back on the 12th of April, that we'll begin to see those barriers coming off, which will affect and should affect an impact upon those 4 tests. And as long as those 4 tests are then complied with and checked, on the 17th of May, we will get to the steps where some events can happen. And we'll go into detail in that. But remember, that's no earlier. So the key date for us is 1 week earlier, the 12th of May. The Prime Minister will announce whether step 3 is going to happen. And why is that important? Because clearly there then has to be another 5 weeks. So if there's a slippage of 1 week, step 4 will go back 1 week. Step 4 is the panacea that everyone thinks will be, oh, it's all going to be open. But it hasn't talked about larger events. And in all of the government, in the detail of the government report, is the fact that there are many codicils and caveats about being able to reopen. They are not saying that large events will be free of any controls. But again, there's a balance that has to be reached. To the public mind, this is what they're seeing. And that's the problem that the government has got. The general disengagement with the restrictions by a significant amount of the public as unlocking happens, as indeed good weather occurs, as you may have seen over the last couple of weekends. Want to look at step 3 there from the 17th of May. What is possible is that controlled indoor events. Now, the roadmap doesn't identify what controlled means. It doesn't say seated, but it could be implied that it says seated. The guidance, the industry guidance around it, is around seated events, but equally that guidance hasn't been updated. It does talk about outdoor events with a reduced capacity, but there's no use there of the word controlled events. So is it just the reduction that will work? And look at this carefully, because there are some safety advisory groups who have misinterpreted this and think it's about space, and have again misapplied the need for space and the understanding of maths. So understand, that is what it says. It doesn't talk about if you've enough space, if everyone can have 1 metre squared each. It certainly doesn't say 2 metres squared each, as one local authority has misinterpreted the regulations. It just says this, and we have to be careful about those groups being overcautious in the reopening. But what is interesting is the special provision for outdoor large seated venues, or as I will call them, sports stadium, or more in particular, football stadium, because this is about money. And it's generally been felt that the reopening of football will assist and help the events industry at large. And indeed, the Sports Ground Safety Authority has done a great deal of work on social distancing and planning how to open, and was ready to go in December with reopening when the new variant and the new second lockdown, or third lockdown as it now is, began around Christmas time. So it was ready to go, and it's really done some great work. And that's why it's ready. And it will look at ensuring that crowds can be safely distributed, have a maximum of 10,000 people or 25% of the seating capacity, whichever is lower. So that's really interesting. Some are saying, and the rumours are, that the government will invite, with the FA, UEFA, to hold the European Championships, the national champion, all in London, because we will have the ability to have audiences, and that's linked to that. But clearly to us in the events world who are interested in step 4, this happening on the 17th of May is fundamental to our reopening process, because if it is delayed or knocked backwards, our reopening will be knocked backwards. Around this, there are also the 4 reviews for normal. The first review is, how long will social distancing and face masks, how long will they be necessary? When will they be necessary? And we've seen talk in the medical circles, the professional medical circles, about having masks in the winter in public areas. So that's clearly going to be fundamental. And that will be about reassuring audiences as well. More of this later. The international travel report, quite interesting, for about unlocking a sense, a temperature, if you like, a pulse, a heartbeat of where the government is. And it's the only one that actually has a fixed date for delivery on it. When will we be ready to reopen? And it's quite interesting, like the events industry, the international travel market has been devastated by the coronavirus restrictions. The other element did generate much process, and there is much debate. This, a COVID safe certificate. Will you have to have one to go anywhere? And some people are saying you do, some people are saying you don't. There's the libertarian. I don't want to get in discussion whether that's possible, but what isn't possible is for the public to have all been fully vaccinated by the 21st of June, and therefore there will be a section, a significant section of the population that go to our gigs and work at our gigs, that will have not had the vaccine. So in other words, it's a moot debate. So it may be something that will happen in the future, perhaps towards the winter, looking at that. Then the last report is the most important report to us. It's about what control measures may be necessary for our major events to happen. Is it possible that the magic wand of the vaccine will take away and remove all restrictions and therefore we go ahead, or will something remain? And that's really interesting, because if you think on the 21st of June, most of the young population, the gig goers, the festival goers, will not have been vaccinated. So it's important to say, what are the controls, particularly around our workforce? And that gets back to social distancing and masks. It may well be that we can meet outside together, but in our workplace, and remember, our staff, our bar staff, our security are at work, the need for the COVID safe environment might still be remaining with us. And this slow unraveling, lifting of restrictions, it is argued by some, Simon here, saying that actually that's actually quite a good thing. Rather than guessing and guessing wrong and making the restrictions too tight, let's wait until we've actually got the real data. Let's make sure, if we can reopen when that's possible. And to put this, from April, there are event research pilot program to examine how events can take place. And these events, pilot events, run in conjunction with the Digital Department of Culture, Media and Sport, will look to see how events can take place without the need for social distancing, which many in the industry have identified as fundamental to the ability of events to take place, because surely that is what events are. It's about not being socially distanced. And then they'll look at and say, well, what are the other mitigations, such as testing? And there's some fine work being done in Holland at the moment around testing prior to event and how that impacts. But in terms of that concept of testing, what it will be interesting as an industry to monitor is to understand how testing in schools has rolled out, because that's the first, if you would like, significant mass testing that will be taking place across the country. how is that working? Because the government have said when they write that report, they will take data from elsewhere. So is testing actually an effective mitigation? The roadmap also goes into great detail about how it will look at a strategy to reopen. And it's saying that it's already working with us. Well, good luck if you're working with that. I would hope that information could be shared, not in the final report, but as we're ongoing, because that sharing, that preparation for reopening is really important for all of us, and to share good practice, which is part of what we're doing. So it's a scientific program, and it's going to look at a series of pilot events in various sectors across the country. They won't be subject to the number restrictions that other events are taking place. And it's about evaluating what's happened. And the pilots, as I said, will start in April. And when the report comes in, remember that report, it will look out a consistent approach to lifting restrictions on all of us. So whilst the country, the nation thinks the 21st of June, midsummer, is when the world will reopen, we don't know. We have to be aware. We can hope that there will be no restrictions, but we have to be aware that there might be restrictions that we have to comply to, particularly when it comes to our workplace. So as the government have said, internet, the date of the 21st is the earliest possible date. And if you were to look at the history of the pandemic, dates have always slipped. So bear that in mind when you're putting factors out there. As we said, the government have looked at the vaccine. I don't want to go too much into the science of the vaccine, but the Joint Committee on Immunisation of Vaccines set out these priority groups. And as I speak to you now, it's group 8 that are beginning to get the vaccine. 55 years, as you go on the website now, if you're 56 or over, so I miss out by a year. If you're 56 or over, that's being rolled out. But there are inconsistencies across the country. And the reason that this has been picked by the JCIV and not sectors and not necessarily there is because they have decided scientifically that this is where the disease is occurring and this is where the most benefit is. So by the time group 9 from the at-risk groups have been vaccinated, 99%, according to the JCVI, will have, of the risk and impacts of the virus, 99% reduction will be in place. And if we look at our population, you can see the population distribution of people over 50 there. But what I have done is map against that for you. This is based on statistical data, the population that goes to gigs, and 90% of it is in the 20 to 60. And what we've got to look at and say is, therefore, there's a very small percentage of the festival events goers that will have had the vaccine. But the most certain thing, our workforce will be at the very bottom of this group. And therefore, we have to think, what about our bar staff? What about our security staff? What about our search regimes? What about the ticketing staff? These people will not have had the vaccine. Therefore, we will require protection around them till at least mid-August. So we need to think about this. So mid-August allows for the vaccine, those who are vaccinated on the 31st of July, for it to become effective. And that's presuming that the uptake is there. So this is important. I've quick graph here, looked at the data with 60 million people, 2 doses. This graph has been based on the 3 million figure. And I know earlier in the presentation, I talked about that being reduced to 2 million. What is fantastic is the government met its 15 million target, and I know over 20 million people are there. Around that, there was a 40-week delivery time. And if you're to map this, you will find that by August, the end of July, everyone in the country will have had the first vaccine, assuming we get the 3 million target. You'll see a bit of a plateau in that delivery. That's because alongside that, there's the second vaccine, which comes in, which I've put the data in here. And what I've also mapped here is the herd immunity at 75%. That's what it varies in the studies. Is it 70? Is it 80%? So I've taken a figure of 75%. If 75% of the population have an uptake in there, we should be effective. And interestingly, if you look at that day of mid-June, that is when not only 75% of the public will have had their first vaccination. If you look at the second line, it's when over 50% will have had their full vaccination. So the essence of the 21st of June isn't as silly as it would look. It's a reasonable date to look at, but that again requires the government to reach its delivery targets. And what it's saying is, it's actually the amount of vaccine, producing it, are the issues, and we can see the complexities around that. But there is positive news around that. We've got the NHS has all of the partners, it has all of the places, and it has currently 2 vaccines. It's achieved what it's done with 2 vaccines. We know the third, the Moderna, is coming online. And then there's number 4, the Novavax, and the Janssen vaccine, all of which will increase the ability to deliver the vaccine, particularly the Janssen, which is a 1-dose vaccine. What could be interesting and perhaps could be asked is, why can't we be a partner? Why can't we at events be a place? Because we will have the very people, as our previous graph showed, that 90% of the population between 20 and 30, 40 at our shows. And we will have the security, the systems, the management systems, and the medics there to help us. Perhaps that's something that could be thought of, presented to, not just for the first vaccine, but certainly when it comes to delivering the second vaccine. But moving on. The problem that they have at the moment is only indicative data, as we talked about the second test. Does it stop the spread? We don't know that yet. And that is part of the data that the government is looking at now. And that's why the roadmap is as long and winding as it probably is. The law, it's the most confusing situation. Our colleagues at the Cheshire Safety Advisory Group are most concerned. They actually don't know what the law will be into unlocking them. And indeed, the plethora of legislation, as Lord Faulkner said, 745 different bits of regulation across the United Kingdom. And it's hard to keep track of them all. The key various bits of legislation that will probably around, we're now in the 4-tier systems. That's where we are now. But there are other bits. The number 3 regulations have that power of the public health authority, or actually the local authority under Article 5, to give directions relating to events. What I would do is direct you to the bottom, the local enforcement powers, kind of not replacing, but underlying the power of the local authority. But there's a reasonableness test, a proportionate test, and it very much follows the footprint of safety legislations. Do something better, hold on that a moment, and permanent restrictions notice. And this is about working with and engaging with people across the regulations. And indeed, there are plenty of other regulations that may be relevant. I think the travel restriction ones will be answered, the health protection, in the review of the 12th of April. But will the red countries still exist? And one of the interesting things that have been done by the government in relation to that is that they can add a country to the red list within 24 hours, almost immediately. And that could impact upon if we have international travellers coming in. But that's something we can identify and mitigate against. So we need to look and work around this. As I've said, the lead regulations are the all tiers regulations. So there's some sort of mistaken belief that the tier system has gone round. It hasn't. It's the only law that exists at the moment. what the Prime Minister has said, that the changes will be to the whole of England. So if we move from tier 4 down to tier 3, that will be for everyone. So there's no regional approach. The interesting bit is that these regulations are actually set to expire on the 31st of March, and we don't know what's going to replace them. We don't know how those regulations are going to be adjusted to reflect the government's aspirations set out in the roadmap. What we do know is that gatherings are permitted, and what we're also aware is that you need to undertake a specific risk assessment, even if you are excluded from them, in relation to COVID-19, and then you have to take account of the government issued guidance and put in place the restrictions that your risk assessment has. In other words, the health and safety approach to events is key to them reopening. What we would remind you, somewhat importantly, is that RIDDLE, the reporting of injuries, disease and dangerous occurrence regulations, require any outbreak of COVID-19 to be reported. It's now a reportable disease if the infection happened at work. Again, how that's going to be policed, good luck on that. But the guidance that the government put out is a little out of date. It happened before Christmas, before the Kent variant came in, and we're expecting the change. But we saw these figures, the 50% capacity and the 4,000 and the 1,000 figures coming into play, but they were very much in tier 1. Whether the tier system themselves will be taken or replaced, if you map the unlocking, the tiers are almost matching each step and matching each of the unlocking. Not exactly, so we can get a sense of where it's going. Just to give you an idea of why we believe safety, risk assessment and implementation is important. If we were to go to last summer's regulations, which obviously have been changed, that again puts safety management at the focus of where you are. There were various complicated Scotch egg rules about food and everything else. Forget that. That's one thing we do know that is going to change. But anyway, there was already an exemption for us. But that's where they were talking about seating. Again, we simply don't know, because there is no clarity on this point whether seating is going to be required. And there is plenty of other guidance out there, keeping work and audiences safe. And I just got an email from the Event Industry Forum telling me that the purple guidance there, the one at the bottom, is currently with the government being signed off. So we should have new guidance, which will help us move forward and help us plan. And perhaps we'll come back to you when we've seen that guidance in place. So what is it that we can do? Well, it's about the safety of everyone at our event. And in particular, I'm going to say the safety of our workforce. It is my belief that the development of the COVID safety approach will be along the lines of the noise at work regulations, where we have to protect our workforce. We have to offer opportunity for the public to have ear defenders and be safe. And so, but if they choose to go down the front and stand in front of us, stick their head inside a sub base, that's what they choose to do. So we have to respect that choice of elements. So it's about the safety and being all, but in particular of your workforce. So the Health and Safety at Work Act will reply. We've already talked about the risk assessment, and I've talked about RIDDLE. Remember, COVID-19 is now a notifiable disease. So what we have to look for now, particularly for our workforce, is how we look after them. Can they socially distance at work? What masks, is it gloves, what can we do to protect our workforce? If there's an enhanced cleansing regime, have we got the equipment to do that? Have we got the PPE in place? Because it's all right to say there'll be a vaccine, but we know from the best figures the government can give us, July, end of July, is when our workforce could be vaccinated. And then we get into that question, are we going to require our staff to be vaccinated? And then we're getting into a whole level of questions there. Who's going to police that? How would we police that, particularly with our casual transient staff that many of us use across the summer? Part of what I want to look at now is, we've talked about what we can do. What is the public expecting us? Everyone's saying, oh, we'll all be open on the 21st and it will all be the greatest new Midsummer's Day ever. But let's go and look in detail at what they're actually saying. Now, this study was undertaken by the Audience Agency in, I think, November last year. And we can see the priorities that are going on around there. There is a high desire, despite the, oh, everyone's going to come to gigs, for safety measures to be in place and to be explained to them. It's actually there. If we can give them reassurance about what is being done, they are more likely to bid with us. There is also some great research being done by the Culture Restart, the Insiders Alliance, Indigo Baker, all up there. This is fantastic contemporary research. This took place in February. This is what they're looking for. So this is the data. What do they feel uncomfortable about? We're looking to COVID testing operating as normal. They're uncomfortable with that. And in fact, the study actually identifies that face coverings and distance seating have become important to the public. And it's so good that we've actually put a link through so you can watch their whole presentation. In our package at the end, in our downloadable stuff, we've got information there that you can see and work through on this. There's also lots of other research, again, that we've made available in our package at the end. So this is worth looking at and understanding, what are the people who are coming to our gigs feeling? So this is really important, I think, to all of where we're going to be. What can we do? Well, we need to look at our COVID-19 and we need to set clear objectives for what we're going to do in reopening. And that's about engaging with the workforce, all of the stakeholders, not just the local authority and the environmental health and the police. We need to speak to our workforce, our audience, and with the media. And we've just seen how important communicating what's going on is safe. I've identified to you the reason the workforce are important. Clearly, those safety advisory group people are going to be there, but also the media. There is going to be an interest above normal in your event. What they will also particularly be looking for, the first car crash event, where it all goes wrong. So we need to be aware that any failure in our industry will impact upon everyone. And that's why it's important that we share good practice as frequently as we can. And it's one of the reasons that we're happy to share with you our thoughts on what's happening. Feasibility. We talk about the money. What figure is your break-even figure? And does that fit with the social distancing? And here you can do lots of things. Have you expanded your festival and got a third stage or a second? Can you go back a step of your expansion to reduce the costs of what you're going to do? Can you change your event? And then equally, when those numbers, if they change, the 4,000 is doubled or the 50% is increased to 75%, how does that affect you and your ability to go ahead? Is there an acceptable figure? And you need to work out what that figure is. And then around that, you need to risk manage. Now, yes, there is specialist support and advice available from companies like Symphotech, but there is also free advice around there. There are industry groups that will share information with you, because we are all in the need to reopen together, and the fewer hurdles that there are, the better for all of us. So we're looking to there. So we also then need to look, what are our contingency strategies? What if it changes? Now, we're all aware of the depressing if it's delayed a week, and we spent a year becoming experts in cancelling, delaying and gigs. But here's another contingency I'm talking about. What if we do change it from 50 to 75 to 100% capacity, no social distancing? Can we do that? Have we got the staff? Have we got the security? Have we got the bar staff? Have we got the stock? Have we got the space? How quickly can we ramp up into the in response to the relaxation? That's part of what you need to look at. How can we increase, and what are the implications for all of us, so that you can have the operational policies? How does the team increase? How does it deliver? What does it mean? Do we have to give each of our staff COVID safe practice training? The answer is, at the moment, yes, we do. And we have to look at how we do that. And then we get back to the really fundamental bit: fund and finance manage. Everything costs. The hand gel, everything, the additional cleaners. What are the costs? Does it continue to make the show feasible? And you need to monitor that expenditure to make sure there isn't an overspend, but more significantly, that you don't under-deliver on key strategies, because COVID safety is about everyone's well-being, but in particular for the staff. So if you've got additional cleansing, don't forget cleansing back in the staff areas and looking at those. What we also have is an issue around level of service, and that's simply space. We've looked at the audience experience, and what we've noted is, whilst there will be people who will run down and want to be in the mosh pit, there will also be the public who attend who want more space to be comfortable, who don't want to rush in and feel this throng of people. They get the sense of community of the crowd, but they will be at a significantly lower density than perhaps you would have done. So that's about putting space, creating the ability to social distance, or giving them the option of social distancing, creating that space. And again, there are techniques we can do this around queuing lanes, and then think about using queuing lanes much as we do inside. The studies in Germany have identified that it's going to the toilet, going to the bar, getting the food, the ancillary activities of a festival attendance, that where the public are likely to not meet social distancing options. So we can use queuing lanes inside and outside, because it's all about service within the site, toilet, bars and food. Bars where many festivals require that break-even figure because of the numbers. So we need to get that working within us. We need to make sure our public are able to buy with confidence around social distancing. And perhaps we can incentivize them. Perhaps we can reduce the price of the beer when the main actor on stage. I don't know. That your brilliance of the events world is that people out there, you people holding the events, are simply more imaginative than anyone else, because the fantastic events that we see use imagination to a way that's fantastic to watch. But around this, we're going to need the normal safety monitoring. We are going to have to include in our process the COVID-19 approach, because that's what the local authorities are looking for. And we know that's what the audience are looking for. And we have to think about it during our build as well. It may take longer. One of the experiences that we had was that the loading took longer, because instead of having sound, lights and video loading at once, you had to load in sequence, in a series rather than in parallel. Build that into your processes, because it makes it safer. It reduces the likelihood of the spread and the consequences of bubbling and breaches of COVID. If it does happen, it enables your gig to happen. And that's the most important process that you want to have putting in there. And again, as part of their monitoring needs to be in place, ensure that the COVID-19 steps are in place, ensure that those dispensers have the gel in, ensure that there are cleaners, yeah? And then make sure that all of your contractors, remember, each of them, whoever they have to have their own COVID safe policies, like they're meant to have their own safety policies. Check it in the same way we would check everywhere else, and ask them for a COVID safe sign-off. They should be discussing with you how this is being done. How do we then check what's going to there? We're going to need training for staff. It's not that complicated. Hands, face, space. What are the systems in work that you've got to do? What are the one-way systems? How does it work? Explain it to them. Where do they take their brace? And that can be reinforced on site with the briefing. Training before, briefing on site. That's going to make sure that you are COVID safe compliant. We also, fundamental to getting our public on site is give them information. Tell them what's happening beforehand, so they don't sit there and say, well, you never say I had to bring a mask. Be there and anticipate that the public may wildly interpret the things. Have the ability to sell them masks. You don't have to give them away. There's a branding opportunity there. Make sure your sanitisation station in place and your cleansing regime. These will be expected. That is what is meant to happen there. So we need to make sure there is additional cleansing, particularly around toilets, particularly around areas where the public become unable to separate. And that may be areas where we need mask wearing to purchase beer or to queue for food. Whereas in the festival site itself, we may not to. I don't know. That will be your risk assessment. But whatever happens, if you've got a requirement for PPE in your risk assessment, make sure that they are available. And then make sure you have social distancing in the workplace, because our staff will not be vaccinated, or their vaccines won't be effective till most likely mid-August. So we need to do that. But also think about the public, who, some of whom, as I've said, will want to be down front, but some of whom will need that space. And to help all your staff, so you're not talking to everyone, put signage in place. Make sure it's there, because that's going to reduce the need for communication. As I've said, the EIF, thanks to Jim, sent me an update. Insurance underwriting talks about events are still going on as we speak. There are concerns about the supply chain being operational, and that's part of what this is going to do. And as I've said, the EIF guidance is actually with the government now, being signed off, ready to share with us, hopefully from next week. As I've said, there are a whole load of resources, and if you follow this link, you can find this presentation, all of the documents that we've mentioned are there. There's a whole set of resources, including some free templates of work that we've put together around the other work that we've done for the industry. Just have to finish. I'm not going to read out the disclaimer, but I would draw your attention to it, that this is about sharing good practice. It is not a definitive set of guidance that you want to do. And again, there's the usual guidance there. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments, do feel free to contact us. We're available at Symphotech. And I hope that we reopen on the 21st of June. I hope that you are ready using some of this advice. And if anybody has any good practice that they want to share, feel free to feed us back to us, because this is about getting our industry open, our industry back to work. Thank you very much indeed. Simon?
Many thanks, Eddie. And thank you very much to Symphotech for making this all happen. If you want to email Symphotech, the email address is info@symphotech.co.uk. My role in all of this is just to help make it all happen. You will be accessing my Dropbox when you download those resources, and you're very welcome to do so. If you have any questions, please do that. Please do share this as widely as possible. Eddie and I are in conversation about how we can hold maybe some more Q&A sessions, maybe using Clubhouse or similar in the near future to try and keep the dialogue going. And as we approach each of the kind of key steps in the roadmap, if it feels important to update, we'll come back with some more materials then. I must say that this whole program initially was made possible with support through the DCMS and Arts Council England from the Cultural Recovery Fund, and we're very grateful for that, and we're fingers crossed to see if that scheme might be extended in the next few weeks as well. But nonetheless, it's great that Eddie, that Symphotech, and so many other people, the AFO, who supported the early part of this project, and the conversations we've been having recently with other partner organisations wanting to get the word out to support the sector have all rallied behind this. So please do share this widely with all the practitioners you can think of in making events and particularly festivals happen.